Greetings, it's Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and decided to do another live stream here where I'm Saturday, and so instead of my arcade games being off as they often are when I'm doing these style videos, everything's actually on. So we'll see how this goes because I will probably be interrupted during the stream as I got to take care of customers first. Hopefully my camera is good there. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I tested it and it sounded all right despite the cacophony of the arcade. But if you can't hear me, I'll see what I can do to adjust the microphone and speak right into it. But anyways, okay, good. So yeah, I published an article here on ArcadeHeroes.com entitled Super Mario's Arcade Origins and History. And I should have had a video prepared for this for the day when they revealed the Super Mario trailer, but I just wasn't prepared, didn't really think about it. But something that the actor Chris Pratt said during that, where he said that the first time he encountered Super Mario Brothers or Super Mario was at the arcade, and that reminded me that there's been quite a few arcade games that have where Mario's been the star, and that's actually where he got his start, whereas most people associate Mario, the character, with the various Nintendo consoles. So that's what we're going to go over today. I'm not going to be playing videos from that other people did, because every time I keep doing a live stream and I play some video, even the Fast and Furious one that I did the other day, it gets dinged, and so I'll avoid that, but I'll play my own videos when we get to it. For George's question in the chat, do you have a Mario versus Sonic at your arcade? I do not. I did look into getting one. I did try. First, I was looking at getting some 2016 units, but what I was going to do was buy the 2020 kits and convert them over, because as we'll talk about near the end, the 2016 version of that game wasn't very popular with operators. I'm not sure how well it did on earnings, but because of the joysticks and how easily they got wrecked, a lot of operators wanted to get rid of that. But the 2020 version got rid of the joysticks, replaced it with buttons, and so I was very, very tempted to do that. It's just, as I recall, the company that had them for sale ended up selling them to somebody else before I could get the purchase done. So I did try, but I did not get there. And even with the used units and the kits, it actually would have been affordable. It would have been cheaper than buying brand new dedicated 2020s. But yeah, so, and as XSC3 mentions there, that was actually me. And so as we can get into here, with the first, I can't remember the first time that I encountered Mario Brothers, the game, and because I was a child, I was 3 or 4 years old, somewhere around there, and I do have very vague memories of playing video games around that time. Like there was one called Hunt the Wumpus on the Texas Instruments 9948 computer, which we had one of those, and I remember playing that. I remember playing TI Invaders on that. They didn't have anything like Mario on it. And at a friend's house, he had an Atari 2600, and I know he would have had Donkey Kong, and so that seems likely that that's where I would have encountered it. Same thing with my cousins. Like when I was a kid, I didn't have an Atari. The only console sort of thing I had at home was the TI, and eventually an IBM PC, an XT model, and then a 286. And so for me, it was the same thing. The first time I played Super Mario Brothers would have been at my friend's house, who had the Atari after he got an NES, and he had Super Mario Brothers and all that. So I don't have as distinctive a memory of when I first encountered Mario like Chris Pratt would, and maybe some people that would have been older in the 1980s when he came around. But yeah, that was definitely my first encounter, and the first encounter that most people would have had with Mario would have been with the arcade game Donkey Kong. In fact, I have a little video here. So this is the only game that I currently have either of my arcade locations that stars Mario himself, where it's Donkey Kong. Now, on the cabinet it says Jumpman, but everybody knows that this is Mario. Obviously, he looks a little different. He was a carpenter at this time, still designed by Shigeru Miyamoto. And Donkey Kong is really something that put Nintendo on the map as a video game company. They had made arcade games prior to this. One that is often mentioned as Radar Scope. That is nothing that Nintendo had made up to that point, like Mellow and Radar Scope. A couple of other ones just really got me, even though at the time, 1980, late 70s, early 80s, it was very common that anytime you put out an arcade game, it did really well. But Donkey Kong, because it introduced several new concepts to gaming, such as being able to jump. While technically there's a game called Space Panic where you would climb up ladders and go on platforms, you couldn't jump in that one, as I recall. So the Donkey Kong really started off the whole genre of platform jumping game. There's been a documentary about King Kong and how popular that one is, and how this has stood the test of time. Now, if you're curious how much this makes per year, I did check my earnings. This year, which has been very much all over the place, well, it's actually decently busy today. I've had some recent Saturdays that really sucked. My other location, things have really sucked up there. But this game has made $458,000 $8.75 so far. At one token to play. So, now, of course, there was the sequel, Donkey Kong Jr., which came out the year right after Donkey Kong, 1982. Now, hide that. There we go. And so, with Donkey Kong Jr., this is an interesting one in that Mario, you don't play as Mario here, and he's the villain, getting revenge on Donkey Kong for kidnapping his girlfriend Pauline, which does look different in the flyer than she does on the arcade cabinet, and of course inside the arcade game itself. And Pauline did show up in Super Mario Odyssey as a character again after being mainly ignored for many years, as I recall, although I have not played every single Mario game out there. And so we've got Donkey Kong Jr., where he was the bad guy, and of course this was before they came up with the idea of Wario or Waluigi being kind of bizarro world evil instances of Mario and Luigi. But I played Donkey Kong Jr. a lot on my Atari 2600 when I finally did get one, which, funny enough, where I'm standing right now, this used to be a KB toy store, and this is the exact location where my parents bought an Atari 2600 Jr., and I got a couple of games with it at the time, which I think one of them might have been Donkey Kong Jr., but I can't remember. I was like 8 or 9, something like that. And but yeah, I remember playing that a lot on the Atari, and pretty decent port given the limited technology. Obviously the arcade version would be much better. And we also have the flyer here. This is on flyerfever.com, where you can see that with Donkey Kong Jr. And Mario, he even rocks the villain mustache from, like, you know, an older cartoons and comics going on there. And this same artwork that was used in this flyer was used on the Atari 2600 and 7800. In fact, I brought the cart. Here we go. So there's the Atari 7800 version of Donkey Kong Jr. There was also an Atari 2600 of Mario Bros. Donkey Kong Jr. If you had an Atari 2600, you might have played this game because it was very common, very popular. This one wasn't done by Atari, it was done by Coleco. But later on, Nintendo did do some licensing with Atari, and so that's where you had these oddities show up. But that's where I had often encountered games like Donkey Kong Jr. before I even knew that they were arcade games. Now, next up is Mario Brothers in 1983. And again, I'm pretty sure the first time I encountered this was on the Atari 2600. But if you wanted the best version of all, you would go to the arcade. Now, from what I recall, the NES version of this was decent. I can't remember, though, if they had to remove anything. But it was interesting when I was researching this that this was inspired, or Shigeru Miyamoto was inspired by the game Joust to come up with Mario Brothers, and that's why it was a two-player game. Flyer does look a little bizarre, like the artwork that they had going on there. Just must have been the artist that they had on staff at the time. But yeah, there was that Game Boy Advance version. I've never played that one, but I've heard about it various times, and I know I've played some other remake of this somewhere. I just can't remember where, but this is where Mario changed his career from a carpenter to a plumber. Now, Luigi being a tall, skinnier type, and Mario being the fatter type, didn't really come around until the Super Mario Brothers TV show that came out sometime in the 80s. I remember watching that. and but because in the arcade games it was just a palette swap and the colors changed, but called them brothers. But you know, they're in the sewers cleaning it up like plumbers do, right? And encountering turtles. I do wonder if this was any sort of influence on the Ninja Turtles or not, but I've not read into that history. But yeah, it came in the Nintendo style cabinet that they've been using since Donkey Kong. They used it with games like Pac-Man and I believe Punch-Out. And soon this was also ported to the PlayChoice-10, which I see, George, you've been mentioning that in the chat. I have tried to get my hands on a PlayChoice-10 over the years, but because it's Nintendo, it always comes with a premium price tag. And once I almost got my hands on a red tent. I really wanted to get a red tent PlayChoice-10. If you're not familiar with that, it's a double-sided, two-monitor Nintendo PlayChoice. And we'll get into PlayChoice here in a second in more detail, but yeah, that's a good price. $1,200 for those. I think at the time that I was trying to get it, it was $500, and I was trying to get on it, but other people saw that too because it was local classifieds, and somebody else got it. So it's like, dang it, missed out. Versus Wrecking Crew, 1984. And so that's what's interesting, too, about the character is since it came out in 1981, which I forgot to put that on there, every single year had a Mario game coming to arcades. And so Versus Wrecking Crew, which is a game I've never played, so I can't tell you much about it. Maybe you have. If you have, mention it in the chat. This came out on Nintendo's Versus hardware, which... If we go to system16.com, I actually almost did when I bought my first arcade machine, which was machines, which were 1942 and Zaxxon. They had one of these Versus systems with the two monitors, two sides on it. I can't remember which games it was. The only reason I didn't go for this is just because it was such a massive cabinet, and I don't even think it would have fit into the van that I had. I didn't have like a truck or trailer to put the games on, and I was also just like, how am I going to put this in my house? And so it's too bad. It would have been cool. It's just what a bulky thing, and definitely would prefer the red tent, but yeah, it is a very cool cabinet. I totally 100% agree. The only ones I've ever seen in this style were not these light gun ones as pictured here. It was always just the joystick and buttons, but you know, if you were going to have Versus Duck Hunt and Versus Hogan Alley, then yeah, might as well get that model. But this did run off of a Famicom and NES, and just did have some minor changes to it, and had quite a nice selection of games that would be released for it throughout the 1980s. But of course, as a part of those, you had Versus Wrecking Crew, which starred Mario and Luigi. It's new and very exciting. Or it's a new and very exciting, or something like that. I probably shouldn't try to do accents. And you could even install it on both sides if you really wanted to. But artwork on this one was also kind of weird. Oh, cool. I hadn't heard about that. I mean, I know that there have been mods of different PlayChoice ones. There have been new releases of PlayChoice games where certain homebrew developers have taken their NES titles and converted them into a PlayChoice game. I think Micromages is one of those. But I haven't followed all of those. And now it should be stated that the NES is not the only home console to get this sort of treatment, but it's probably the most successful out of all of the different console to arcade things that have ever been set up. And so, yeah, that was Wrecking Crew in 1984, 1985. This is where, of course, we get to the PlayChoice-10 that we've also been talking about, as it mentions here. Looks like I'm a little zoomed in there. So, and I'm sure some of you might, I think, George, you mentioned you had one of these. If for others that might be watching, you either might have one or you've seen one of these before. And this, of course, was also an NES that allowed up to 10 games to be installed at a time. And it had 2 monitors, and the top monitor would give you instructions as to how to play. But thanks to the PlayChoice, it allowed a lot of Mario content to show up in the arcade as well. And it was fully coin-operated. As far as I understand, anybody correct me if I'm wrong on this, PlayChoice-10 games were not really modified, whereas Versus games were modified on their content. At least that's my understanding about it. Of course, you did have the instructions on the top, but nobody really cares about that. And so Super Mario Brothers was available that way. And as I mentioned here as well, Super Mario Brothers 2 and 3 are also in the arcade thanks to the PlayChoice-10. But then there is this other sort of oddity, and that's Versus Super Mario Brothers in 1986, also known as Versus Mario's Adventure, as this flyer states here. And again, on flyerfever.com, a great site for flyers. And oh yeah, that's right, I did forget about that, George, that there is an adapter to just plug straight NES carts right into it. And so while I didn't have this game as a kid, I wanted it really bad, although my mom says, I don't remember you ever asking for an NES, but I remember desiring one, because like everybody on my street had an NES, but I didn't. And so but I finally made up for it, and I have this as well as Super Mario Brothers 2 on NES. I should get 3, but it's on the Switch. But anyways, the Versus one, I know that there are several changes to this. The game is harder. It also changed something about the bricks in, I think it's World 1-1, or sorry, 1-2, where you cannot get on the top there and run across to get ahead. But otherwise, other than some of these changes and slightly harder difficulty, changes in where the items are in the question mark blocks, it's the same thing. And I also did come across one of these once. This was essentially a dedicated version of Super Mario Brothers for the arcade. But again, if you're not lightning fast on being able to pick one of these up when they show up on a local classifieds, it's usually gone within a day. Always highly desired. And then, moving on, so there, of course, Super Mario Brothers 2 and 3 or 1988, 89 around there. That's twice as hard as the original. Wow. Dang. I mean, I still wouldn't mind having one here, because as I talked about in my video where retro games generally don't do well, like I mentioned, my Donkey Kong, it's made only $450 this entire year. I'm pretty sure if I had a Versus Super Mario Brothers, it would do all right. I mean, I wouldn't be expecting it to be making $1,000 a year or anything, but it would probably do all right. Maybe comparable to Miss Pac-Man, hopefully, maybe even Street Fighter 2. But for 1990, hitting the 90s, we had Dr. Mario and Versus Dr. Mario. So there was one version made for the PlayChoice, one version made for the Versus system, and I would guess that the one pictured here, it's kind of hard to tell because it's blurry. Maybe that's PlayChoice. I'm not sure. But, I forgot. There were flyers for Super Mario Brothers 2 as well as 3. Of course, these flyers were also mentioning some of the other games you could get, which were basically just straight over NES ports. But yeah, here we go. Dr. Mario, or Versus Dr. Mario. For that. I've never played this one, so I don't know if it also has some changes, if it's harder than the home version, but this was the last official game released for the Nintendo Versus system, or the last game Nintendo would release for it. I'm sure somebody's done a homebrew, or there's probably an adapter to do NES games on your Versus hardware if you happen to have one still sitting around. But I did play Dr. Mario on the Game Boy, and remember that. Just always preferred Tetris a little bit more than that. And I didn't play Dr. Luigi, which came out a few years ago either, so should try that one time. Although, maybe with the right changes, a modern Dr. Mario in arcades would work fine. Then we have Mario's Open Golf for PlayChoice-10, 1991, one of the last games released for the PlayChoice. Yeah, I agree. It's been odd that there just hasn't been a lot of good puzzle games out in arcades in a long time, and it's just, the temptation to put them on mobile or home consoles is too great. And to be honest, I've not seen a lot of puzzle games do very well here. I have had Tetris by Atari Games. I've had Tetris Plus 2 by JLco. I've had Clax out, and every time just they don't get played. And there was also the very surprising thing that happened a few years ago where Play Mechanics was testing out a game called Tetris Dimensions in arcades, and it bombed on test. They were shocked by how many people did not understand Tetris. And so why that is, that's very surprising, because it's like the game still seems to do well every time there's a new Tetris, like Tetris 99. But I guess out in the world of arcades, in the casual normie world, for some reason the game just bombs. Don't really get that, but there is Bust a Move Frenzy out right now by Raw Thrills, and that's basically the only puzzle game that we have there. Maybe it's because of the cabinet screen. Yeah. Hi, how's it going? So we're like an old school arcade, 25 cents a token, and games are between 1 to 4 tokens each.
Start out with $10, $40.
Okay, pass your card. Go ahead, tap, insert, or swipe. There's $5 and 10. Got any questions? Let me know.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
You're all good.
Alrighty. So yeah, Tetris, I think it's very specific as to, and other puzzle games might be specific to where they go. Like I did want a Tetris Giant by Sega when that came out back in 2009 or so. I just like the idea of the concept or the cabinet and those gigantic like basketball-sized joysticks. But I don't think it sold very well. It might have sold under 100 units. And there were a couple of different versions, but it was, it just also seemed to bomb. But anyways, there was Mario's Open Golf on the PlayChoice-10. I almost wonder if that sort of thing might have done better if it had a trackball, kind of like Golden Tee, because the original Golden Tee came out the year prior, in 1990. And then we also had Nintendo's, I think this was the last time that they themselves actually manufactured a cabinet, and this is the Nintendo Super System. And so the idea behind this was to do the PlayChoice-10 but with the Super Nintendo instead of the NES. And so it, as you can see from this, or if you've ever seen one before, I actually did have an opportunity to buy this one, and it wasn't going out the door because it used these bizarre game pads, and in an arcade a game pad just generally does not work out. It was like an SNES controller, but everything was oversized. From what I hear is that it wasn't terribly reliable, and so this never got as much support. It did not reach its unlimited potential as it says on the flyer here. Not as many games were released for it, but naturally, since Super Mario World did come out as the pack-in title for the SNES, this also was available in arcades through the Nintendo Super System. And so, yeah, it's an interesting little cabinet. It's just, from everything I've always heard, those pads are crap. But yeah, it does have F-Zero on it, so there's that at least. And making it another one for, there's F-Zero and then F-Zero AX, as you mentioned there, George. And we also, I found on this site, Arcade History, it has a listing for Super Mario All-Stars, but there's no information about it at all, so I'm guessing this might have just been a game that was canceled, but I've never really read about that until I came across that entry here. So, and I something is a little off on this image too. Like, I've seen pictures of these, and they are slightly different than what they pictured in the flyer here for some reason. So maybe that was like a pre-release prototype. Then we got pinball. Everybody loves pinball, right? And so there have been 2 Super Mario games released to pinball. I'm kind of surprised that a company like Stern hasn't tried to do another Super Mario game over the years. But the first one was done by Gottlieb in 1992. And this isn't terribly well known, but Charles Martinet, who has been the guy who has been known as the voice of Mario up until Chris Pratt grabbed the role for this upcoming movie. The very first time he voiced Mario was for this game. And this was also Gottlieb's first game to use a color DMD display. And interestingly enough, in the trivia over on the Internet Pinball Database, it does not mention this, but I do know that that is accurate. In fact, Charles Martinet was here in Salt Lake City recently for the Salt Lake FanX, which used to be the Salt Lake Comic Con. And there was a local pinball collector here who has one of these Super Mario Bros. Pinball machines. He took the Translite and had it signed by Charles. I joked with him he needs to now get it signed by Chris Pratt. But yeah, this one, it took some influence from the Super Mario Brothers cartoons in a way, but also just a lot of the artwork that existed for like Super Mario Brothers 3 and such at the time. And there were Mario comic books and everything. I remember when I was a kid that this was the game everybody talked about at school. Like the way that kids talk about Minecraft these days, that's how we talked about. This was the video game that everybody talked about back then. But excuse me. But yeah, colorful game. I've played this once. I came across it at the Pinball Hall of Fame in Las Vegas. I'm not sure how many of them are out there, although usually, let's see, 4,200 units were produced, and so there should be a few out there. And as George says, you would pay $6,000 for one. I haven't looked at myself what their value has been, but that's at least one good thing about pinball is they generally hold their value or they appreciate. It's rare that they depreciate, and when they have a theme like this, they tend to hold their value even more. But again, I wouldn't mind pinflation. I wouldn't mind myself seeing a new take on Super Mario Brothers, and who knows, maybe with this new movie coming out next year, that could be Stern's next game. I mean, that's one that, or Jersey Jack, or whoever it is that can get the license. I'm sure it would not be cheap. Of course, that is one problem with pinball right now. When I saw the price on, there was the price of Toy Story 4, which was $12,000 to start, and then James Bond is somewhere close to $7,000-8,000 to start, and yeah. But yeah, I would take a modern Dr. Mario, or I think any puzzle game if it had up to 4 players, like say a new Clax, and it had 4-player support, or Tetris, or Dr. Mario, or Puzzle Bobble, whatever, could probably do fine, in my opinion, but, maybe not. Maybe it would bomb. Something maybe X Arcadia should try. But also, that came out just a couple months after this pinball machine was Super Mario Bros. Mushroom World. But as it mentions here, this one is far more rare than the game we just talked about, as it was designed primarily for kids and redemption play. And this is one where it comes in a very strange cabinet where it has this enormous back box, but then the cabinet itself was very short. It's almost, I don't know if that's like half the size of one. It does seem like it was a wide body almost, but you could get it with the standard, or you could also change it had different drilled holes for the legs, so you could have it as the standard height or the lower height for kids. And as I mentioned in the video where I was talking about pinball and what it needs to do to try and earn, I had a lot of people afterwards say, well, it should use ticket redemption. It's like, well, ticket redemption's been tried on pinball machines. This isn't the only instance, but it's been tried many times and it fails every time. Redemption just does not help people understand, I guess, what's going on. But this one even came with a nice little siren light. But let's see if there's a photo of the... Doesn't look like they have any good photos of the playfield. But, I mean, everything's kind of cramped in there. Got some ramps to play on, nice targets. I'm not sure if it's a 3-flipper game like the other Mario one was. Nope, 2 flippers and all that. But, yeah, so Mario has been around in pinball, too, but only time was 1992. And then there was this weird one from 1993 done by Bam Presto. Now, of course, after the Nintendo Super System essentially flopped, Nintendo just hasn't made any of their own arcade cabinets. They've licensed their IP out for others like Sega, Bandai Namco, Bam Presto, Konami, and etc. to do. And so that was this oddball where it was a card vending game that was only released in Japan called Mario Undokai. And this one, I don't know if I want to play the video because I just hate getting dinged every single time I play any video footage on these live streams. But yeah, Mario Undokai. Here we go. Here's a picture, a blurry, low-res picture. What's interesting about it is it used this foot pad, and I watched that video where, and there's also video, I think this has been emulated. I don't know if the emulation is perfect, but you would step on the directions, or you would just walk or run in place by stepping on these 2 little pads right here, and a very small screen. But it was just kind of a sports game, almost like a predecessor to the Mario and Sonic at the Olympics arcade machines that would come along, and offered a footpad controller 5 years before DDR did. But I know saying that sometimes upsets Konami fans. But it's true. It's just what it is. Then there was a big gap between any Mario games in the arcade, and there was one that I should mention. Let's see, let's go to Flyer Fever, just type in Mario, and here we go, very first one. So in 2004, Namco did this re-release of Donkey Kong Jr. and Mario Brothers, and just put them all into one cabinet. They actually did this for a few different games where they had a Pac-Man Miss Pac-Man Galaga one. I know Taito did something similar to this with Kicks and Space Invaders. And so just back in the 2003 to 2005 era, this sort of idea was popular. But from my understanding, it did sell very well, but it's still uncommon to find because they only produced it for a short time. And, oh, your FEC has one, Atlantis. That's cool. I wouldn't mind coming across one, owning one myself. I do have one of the Pac-Man Miss Pac-Man Galaga ones, but I don't think I've ever seen one of these for sale, just because it probably sells very quickly if it does pop up. But it came in 25-inch monitor and 19-inch monitor cabaret models, so that was cool. And had artwork, which I would assume would please fans. But it's that aside, because that's a re-release and not something new. The next time Mario would show up would be in 2005 with Namco's Mario Kart Arcade GP. And, of course, all of the Mario Kart arcade games have done very well on the market. The first one, let's see, I think, yeah, here we go. Here's the flyer for the first one. It used the Sega Triforce hardware, or Namco Triforce hardware, which was a GameCube with extra RAM, and it added in things like Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man that you could drive as, and of course the arcade versions are the only ones where you can drive as various Namco characters. This also had the Namcam feature. This was not the first game to use the Namcam. There was Gunman Wars, which I think that was 98, that had that. Hi, how's it going? How can I help you? Here you go. Thank you. Yeah, so it had the NamCam, which was a very cool feature that Namco's used in a lot of games. You know, it has the overlays with different Nintendo characters in this particular game, so you could look like Yoshi or Mario or whatever. And another very interesting thing about the various arcade outings on Mario Kart is that it says here, hundreds of power-up items available. And so while it's generally known in the console versions where it only has 7 or 8, somewhere around there, I never counted, but you know, you've got your green shells, your red shells, your banana pills, your bombs, your blue shells, the lightning bolt, stuff like that. But this version came with hundreds of items, and I'm sure there was just a lot that their functionality was the same, but the look was different. But it had things like oil slicks, throwing a pie in their face, which would probably work like the squid version. But they did that to change things up. And as it says here, massive fan base can't wait to put the pedal to the metal in this arcade version, since this is really the only version where you get that steering wheel and pedals. Yes, there was Mario Kart Wii, which had the steering wheel attachment, but nothing beats that steering wheel on an arcade machine when it comes to that. And of course, just a couple of years later, there was Mario Kart Arcade GP2, which just really expanded upon what had already been established with that. From what I recall, other than adding more items, adding more tracks, adding more characters, is that this also had live voice commentary. You had somebody, an announcer saying what was going on in the game. And live play-by-play commentary. And here's some examples of the NamCam stuff. Added Waluigi and Tamagotchi, new courses, new items, all that stuff. And something about collecting coins to customize your car. I would be pretty sure that the card system would have been a Japan only thing and not a US one. I don't recall hearing Mario Kart Arcade GP2 here having a card system. And then of course there's the one that most of you are probably familiar with because it's been so wildly popular and it's out there everywhere. In fact, you can still buy Mario Kart Arcade GP DX. They're still rolling these off the manufacturing line. And so thanks to that, this is the first time that it went to an LCD panel. And initially when this came out, it was connected to the internet, and any arcade operator like myself, like the Maximum Tune here, you had to pay a monthly fee for it. And what they said was, we're going to have 5 years of updates, content updates, adding new characters, new courses, all that stuff. And the fee will help pay for the development costs of that. But they never did 5 years worth. As I recall, they only did 2, maybe 3 content updates on the US side. Now over in Japan, they've actually done many more than that. I think only recently they, games as a service. Only recently did they put Mario Kart offline over there, or had their final update. But if you were to play the US version of Mario Kart GPDX and the Japanese version would be better. It would have more stuff in it. One thing that they have there, I'm not sure if the US version has this or not, is the infinite green shells mode, where everybody just gets infinite green shells. I'm sure that's a very chaotic one, but probably a lot of fun to play, I would assume. But here's one that is on my channel, so I can play it and shouldn't get dinged at all. And this was one of the final courses that had been added to the US version. It's obviously on the Japanese version, but Pac-Man Stadium. And unfortunately, I never got a good quality version of this video to share, so it's very blurry. Yeah, 360 is as good as we get there. But this and Namco Stadium are on the US version at least. And if they can keep producing this for a few more years, it'll become the longest produced arcade game in history. I think that right now the global VR game Aliens Extermination holds that record, as they started making those in 2006 and they stopped making them, I think, in 2019. So very, very long time. But this came out in 2013, and so yeah, just kept building on it. Now, one complaint that I've heard about all of the Mario Kart arcade games is that there's no option for winner wins a free race, which is something that is available like on Maximum Tune 5. It's available on pretty much every Raw Thrills racer. I think it's available on different Sega racers, but for this one, I mean, I've never owned one of these to see if it's in the menu, but that's a common complaint I've always heard about the Mario Kart arcade games. But as far as I'm aware, none of those have ever, none of the levels or anything from any of these arcade versions have ever come to consoles. And so that means that they're all arcade exclusive. Hooray, arcades. And then we get to our most recent ones, which I did talk about a little bit at the beginning of the video here. And that was Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games Arcade Edition, which is one of the longest, possibly the longest. Oh, my connection sucks. Is one of the longest titles in arcade history. Maybe because I'm live streaming, it doesn't want to play this, but you can find footage of this on my channel. And so this took the console game and arcadified it and gave it a... Here we go. Maybe you have to turn that down. But what was interesting about this one, it used 55-inch HD screens set vertically. And as you can see here, plenty of Sega and Nintendo characters to choose from, but the Nintendo characters are all Mario-based and not like Metroid and Zelda and all that stuff. But it had a foot pad, and then it had these unique oversized joysticks. And depending on the event that you would play, you would use the joysticks or the foot pad, or you'd use both. It varied. But the one, as cool as those joysticks were, the one problem is that they broke down all the time. I've heard many arcade techs, or pretty much every operator that had one of these, they cursed the joysticks because they would break down all the time, and it wasn't cheap to fix them, which is one reason why I'm often telling people to please be nice to the stick shifter on the Maximum Tune, is because they're not cheap to fix or replace if they break down. And so that at least it was unique. At least they tried to do something different. I mean, sports games have always been kind of rare in the modern age of arcades. It's generally just been Golden Tee's wheelhouse there, maybe Silver Strike Bowling, but other unique concepts of things you can do in the arcade you usually didn't find, but this one you did. And so it's just a shame that, usually people will just use the joysticks like they're, going plus ultra, if you know My Hero Academia there, and just snap those. And that's too bad, very unfortunate. But to address that, the Sega would come out with the 2020 version of Mario and Sonic Olympics. And what they did there was they got rid of the joysticks. They kept the foot pad there. Let me get rid of this ad here. And they replaced the joysticks with 3 arcade buttons. And so these buttons have been designed to take a beating. If people want to go crazy, then they last a lot longer. And when they break, it's a lot cheaper to replace. And like I said at the beginning, I did look at getting these because they did offer it as a conversion kit for the original ones, as I think I'm mentioning in the video there. But Sega saves Nintendo from Nintendo doing it wrong. I'm sure in this, Nintendo, all they had to do was license it and just give it the thumbs up, and everything else was Sega. But yeah, just what you had to do, again, just depended on the game. But like for swimming, you just had to tap the tap them at the right time. I might have been overdoing it when I was filming myself here. But this was filmed in March 2020. The game was released in February 2020. So if you haven't seen this one out there, the reason why is because it was released at one of the worst possible times in history to release an arcade game, which was a month before the pandemic hit. And, you know, everybody stopped buying equipment for pretty much most of that year. And so I'm not 100% sure if this one's still on being produced by Sega. It might be, but it's the most recent. It's the last Mario game that's been released to arcades so far. Now, of course, that could certainly change as we go on. I mean, that makes 19 games that don the Mario name to them, and there's always something else that could be in the works. I have some honorable mentions here on the post too. Mario Roulette by Konami, which is a gambling game. Hi. Just need help? Okay. And then there was Luigi's Mansion Arcade, which I do have at my other location. If I end up closing that other location, then it'll be down at this one. But if you've not seen this before, I have on my channel a full direct capture playthrough of this one. Although I could probably do another one, because the cool thing about this one is it has multiple paths to choose. So makes it a little bit different every time. But from what I recall, I don't remember seeing Mario in this one at all. That's why it's an honorable mention. But as mentioned previously, Luigi did get his start in arcades too through Mario Bros. So there's that. Let me pause that there. And then we have Mario Party Challenge World. So this was, well, in 2016 or so, Capcom did release this Mario Party Challenge World to Japan, and it's what they call a medal game, kind of their redemption over there. I've never played a Japanese medal game though, so I couldn't really tell you much about them. But if you go to Japan here soon, because they are reopening back up to tourists, and visit some still existing arcades. Oh, you're fine. I'm talking something else. People think I'm talking to them. You might come across one of these. But back in 2017 or so, again, like always, this video's on my channel, but Raw Thrills and Capcom were joining forces to test out this concept for US arcades. Now, the one that I filmed, it was a 6-player version, and it used projection mapping, but it pretty much contained all the same gambling elements that were present in the Japanese version. And so I remember talking with both Raw Thrills and Kevin Bacchus of Dave & Buster's. He's a executive vice president there, or senior exec. I remember him saying, I would like to test these out in one of our locations, but I know that certain states we just can't do it like this. And so Raw Thrills had to change it. And I never saw, I've only seen photos of the modified version that they did, which was a 3-player one, but I don't know if it had anything to do with the balls and the holes and all that. I mean, I would think that a Mario Party game could work, because there have been party games in arcades before. I mean, right now there's one called Retro Raccoons out there from Incredible Technologies and GlitchBit, but there's games like Panic Park. It was a fantastic party game, and so I'm sure that with the right thinking you could do a Mario Party game. You know, you just need the right mini games that work in an arcade to do it. So I'm kind of surprised that this one never got anywhere. But yeah, the projection mapping was really, really good, and as far as I am aware, this was the first time that Raw Thrills had ever done anything with projection mapping. They also did try to do projection mapping with Star Trek Battlegrounds, but that game also never got released, and so they've been experimenting with it. They've just not found a concept that seems to work yet. and instead they've been doing like VR stuff. And of course, as I mentioned on the live stream yesterday, they just released Fast and Furious Arcade, which I have confirmed is actually released. It's shipping. It's just they only have 100 units to start, and so first come, first serve and all that. But this was an impressive one to see just because the quality of the projector was really, really good. High contrast, high color depth, and all that. Didn't look all pixely. But too bad they couldn't figure out how to make that one work. And yes, I wholeheartedly agree. To me, going off on a tangent here, I think there's a lot more potential that could be found with projection mapping, or what you could also call mixed reality, than there is with virtual reality. For one, with virtual reality, you have to put something on, and that always causes a problem. There's always a risk of damaging that equipment, whereas projection mapping, you don't have to put anything on, and yet it's still very unique, it's very cool, and it's also something that you wouldn't be able to really do with a console or a phone or anything that you could get at home. It's one of those things that could, take arcades to the next level. But for some reason, just there have been some other concepts out there on. Let me show you some inside here. Let's see. Trying to remember the name. Here we go. Is that even working right? I don't know. Here we go. So this is a game from a company called Touch Magic's Mystery Island. That's it. And so it's one of the only released games, I think, that used projection mapping, and it was very impressive. And it used this oddly shaped cone and was basically a platformer. You were playing as a pirate on an island, and you just had to try to get to the top to get the treasure, and just joystick and button controls and all that. And then let's see if it starts showing. Yeah, it even had a strobe light and everything, but yeah, it just projection mapped everything onto this oddly shaped cone, and it was pretty cool. I mean, maybe had the game been changed a little bit, instead of just being a jumper, I think it would have been more fun to be a slasher sort of thing. And it was obviously made for redemption. I'm not 100% sure how many of these they might have produced, if any, as well. But again, just I love seeing stuff like this in arcades and pushing the boundaries to be able to try different stuff. And so if any of you ever seen this game out there, again, I'm not sure if it did actually see a release. I'll have to ask the Touch Magics guys, because I do have contact with them, but it's not been on their website for a long time, and so just not 100% sure if it survived all that. But let's see. We've got one last Mario one to mention in the honorables, and that is Mario Kart VR. And this was done by Bandai Namco again. And this was not mass-produced. It was released, but it's very hard to come across. As far as I'm aware, only one ever made it to the United States, maybe two. But I have no idea where they're at presently, because they were kind of done here in the States as like a pop-up arcade experiment. They were in London, and I did see a comment after I posted this from Ted saying that there is these still exist. I think it's at 10 Pin Bowling in the UK, and there are a couple of them there, and there also were some in Japan, of course, because Namco had this project that they called Project, gosh, now it's escaping me, Project ICANN, VR Zone, something like that. And yeah, so it had arcade-style driving controls. You put the VR headset on. It had these things that you put on your wrists, but it could detect, like, if you went like this, it would throw your item. And everything I've heard about this is that it was very cool. I'm very surprised that Namco did not release this in mass, because they did have this VR concept that they were pushing for a few years called We Play VR. And I saw a concept where it was this arena one that you would go around with a VR headset in an arena, but they had a concept where they would also attach Mario Kart VR stations to the side of this. And why they never did that, I have no idea. I guess you'd have to ask them. But that covers all the Mario games, so let me check the chat and see if you guys got anything that I might have missed. So Julian Anakin Films has a question. Have I heard of Jet Rider? Yeah, I have. I've not seen one. I think I sold one way back when I used to sell games. Might have been a used one. I can't remember though. But I don't remember it, unfortunately. And yeah, it is weird that there aren't any Namco characters in the Mario Kart VR game. On that one, I'm not really sure. The closest thing that they have that I'm aware of as far as like there being a Nintendo arcade would be the new Super Nintendo World that's over in Japan as an under construction over in down in Hollywood, California, and in Orlando, Florida. However, everything I've seen from the Japan one doesn't have an actual arcade in it. I mean, it would make sense to me for them to have an arcade and for them to get all of their Nintendo-made games and put them in this place. That would be pretty cool to me. But there is, of course, the Mario Kart roller coaster, which I do believe has augmented reality attached to it of some kind. But, yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see if the U.S. versions add an arcade to them or not. They definitely should if they aren't considering it. But if they don't, I'm sure it'll still be a cool park, just hopefully not overpriced and everything. But sorry, Julian, did you have a question about Jet Rider? And while we wait for that, is there any particular Mario release that you would like to see come to arcades, or is there maybe something with the overall Mario concept that you would like to see done that maybe arcades could do in a unique, interesting way that couldn't be done on the consoles? Before we finish. Give everybody a moment to Oh, gotcha. Yeah, unfortunately, I've had dealings with Trio Tech before, but they've become, while they used to do a lot of arcade stuff like Wasteland Racers, and of course the Mad Wave Motion Theater and all that stuff, they just kind of... Hi. Here you go. But Trio Tech just they don't really care about arcades anymore. They still have the like the Storm VR, and they have the Typhoon 10-year anniversary. But no, I've not played Jet Rider. I've not heard that one in a while. I haven't played Wasteland Racers either, which I believe is the very first HD arcade game to be released. It was the first one to run at 720p, and it also was the first one to use an LCD screen. Yeah, Super Smash Bros. Yeah, if any have missed that, Jay Devi and myself did do a joke, an April Fool's joke, a little while back, where we made a mock-up of a Super Smash Bros. Arcade. I think I mentioned this in a recent live stream, but this joke was so good and so convincing that there were people who called their distributor, their arcade distributor, and were going to cancel like Injustice arcade orders and buy this, because they're like, I know this will do well. I will get one, but. It was a lie. I'm sorry. But if this ever does come to fruition, there was somebody in Venezuela. I saw a picture of this a few years ago, where they made their own Super Smash Brothers arcade cabinet, and I guess Nintendo's lawyers can't reach them there. But obviously, it would just be a console on a timer sort of thing instead of an official sort of thing. But, and I guess in thinking about it, oh yeah, there is an arcade out in California that has one. I covered this on a News Bites post. High Scores Arcade debuts Super Smash Bros. Melee cabinet. And so this was, I'm not sure if they're still open, but this story was done back in the summer of 2019. But this arcade called High Scores Arcade in Alameda, they made their own games that were not quite official, but they looked really nice. From these looked amazing. And so they had Super Smash Bros. Melee. They had Legend of Zelda, which never came out on the PlayChoice-10 as far as I'm aware, and Oregon Trail, which definitely did not come to arcades. But yeah, I guess the joke did go a little too far, but gotta laugh. I am sorry. But yeah, Ballistics, that's right. I remember, I've seen Ballistics before. I've played that one. That's a cool concept. It's just, like I said, it's too bad that Triotech's just kind of given up on arcades. And, I mean, they make tons of money off of their dark rides, like the XD Theater, XD Dark Ride, and some other stuff that they got. So it makes sense. And yeah, UFO Stomper, I have played that one too. That was an interesting projection map concept out there. But yeah, we could always dream. I mean, I do think there are other Nintendo IP could easily make a transition to the arcade. Like with The Legend of Zelda, you could probably, like, it was back on the Wii, they had like that Link's archery range. I never actually played that one. But hi, how's it going? Good, good. They're 25 cents each. Okay. Here you go. Thank you. But, gosh, now I almost forgot what I was talking about. Something game-related. Oh, wait, yeah, other Nintendo games, like Metroid, you could totally turn that into a light gun shooter, like, say, something like with the Walking Dead or House of the Dead or Jurassic Park. I mean, mounted gun game with Metroids, why wouldn't that work? Or you know, Metroid Prime, or Legend of Zelda, like, or actually pointing back at the Walking Dead that uses crossbows. I mean, yeah, Link doesn't use a crossbow, but he uses a bow a lot of the time. So, you know, why not have a Legend of Zelda archery sort of thing going on? And of course, the one that everybody wants to see again is F-Zero AX, or a new F-Zero. I have heard from a friend who passed away, but he had some inside info with Nintendo that he saw F-Zero on the Switch. But this was like back when the Switch was first released. Obviously, it's been a while and nothing's come out of that. But he also told me about Pikmin 4 years ago, and I guess that's been kind of ready to go for a long time and is only recently announced. So Nintendo takes their time on stuff. One thing I guess to also mention, since we're talking about Nintendo IP in the arcade, and not a lot of people know about this, but there was a Star Fox in development by Namco, and it would have ran on the Triforce hardware. Unfortunately, this flyer right here is the only thing that's ever been released about it. Now, I have been told from somebody who actually saw this in action, I think it was based on Star Fox Assault, but for some reason the frame rate was really bad, and I don't know why they just wouldn't fix that. And, you know, optimize their code or remove objects that are causing slowdown or improve the hardware, overclock it, whatever it is that you need to do to get that running. But it was only about 30% complete, and they canned it. But that one also might have used Namco's dome screen sort of thing. So that would have been very interesting had they gone that far with it. But yeah, I mean, I still think they could have found a way to, either increase the Triforce's power or, code better or just use a PC or port it to a PlayStation 2. I don't know. But yeah, that's Mario's history in the arcades and Nintendo's almost essentially Nintendo's history in the arcade. Obviously led the way by Mario, or if you're in the northeastern United States, Mario. Got any other comments on Nintendo in the arcade, Mario in the arcade, etc. before we go? They added Samus from Metroid and Toy Coaster. I'm not sure what Toy Coaster is. I guess it might be a ride film. And you love Fruit Ninja FX too. Yeah, not a Nintendo game, but that's still cool. And yeah, I'm not sure what my next live stream will be, but as I've mentioned previously, there is a big trade show coming up for arcades. It's about a month away. It's called IAPA. Takes place in Orlando, Florida, and so a lot of new arcade games will be unveiled there. I'm aware of some of them that are going to be around, but sometimes there's just surprises that you don't know about until you show up. I mean, there's always a chance that at Raw Thrills or Sega or Namco they could have something new that's Nintendo related, but won't know until I get there for certain. But yeah, I'll be covering that with some edited videos, maybe some live streams if I can manage to get a decent solid signal on my phone in the convention center. That's often very hit and miss, but Fast and Furious with actual Fast and Furious content, well, that's not happening. It has the logo though and the universal license, so that's all you need. Well, Dave & Buster's always they'll use things until they're just taking up space, and when they need to sell them off and get new stuff with what they can. I've seen that Alien Covenant game, which really was just they changed the marquee and the lighting on the Aliens Armageddon game, but they didn't change the gameplay at all. I've seen that out there at places that aren't Dave & Buster's after they got rid of that. So that happens. But anyways, thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video. Or yeah, Luigi's Mansion 3 arcade, that'd be cool.